Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another week of Focus at 40. See, when we're together, it flows way better.
It flows.
So I am Kathy Goodall. I am a mentor, a leadership and growth coach, a marketing consultant, and a part of the Focus at 40 duo.
And I am Genesis Etienne. I am a licensed mental health counselor, a marriage and family therapist, a sociologist, a podcaster, a mom, and 100 other things. And yes, I am the other part of this fantastic and wonderful dynamic duo, Focused at 40.
So I know that you see a very handsome gentleman on the screen with us today, and I am going to allow Genesis to introduce him to you.
Yes, guys. So today we have with us Kirk Welcome. He is a financial professional with Equitable Advisors. And Equitable Advisors, I met Kirk because I was going through what happens to a lot of us when we work for ourselves, when we're self-employed, when we are contracted employees and not necessarily working with a W-2, and when we have to come up with our own solutions for our financial issues, right? Or some of our financial concerns. So I met Kirk, and Kirk has been an invaluable wealth of information, knowledge, resources, and action for my own financial plan, to the point where I needed for what he's been able to share with me to be extrapolated into the world, because it's such an important thing that it's such an important conversation to have, not only at this time in our lives, but before, we turn 40s and going into our 40s and well after. So Kirk, welcome. We're so excited to have you. We are absolutely just enthralled that you are a part of us today. Tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we're going to get right into the conversation.
Oh, great. Thank you. In fact, the guys, I look forward so much to this meeting. You have no idea.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, I'm excited. So again, my name is Kirk Welcome, financial professional with Equitable Advisors. I think I'm going into my 22nd year as an advisor.
So he knows what he's talking about.
Yes.
Or I made it up for the last 22 years.
Well, you did well if you've been doing it for 22 years. Yeah.
So basically what I do is I work with a team of professionals. And the way I explain what I do is we answer two fundamental questions all day from our clients. One is, will I make it? And the it is where we dive in and spend a lot of times, as I've done with Jen, where we talk about, what's important to you now and what's important to you in the future. And for different people at different goals. So that's one thing. And that's where the bulk of my conversations occur. And the second thing is I focus on what's called blind spots in life. And I think we're going to touch a lot on that today. And blind spots, as an easy way to explain it would be, what happens if I live too long, die too soon, or got sick or hurt for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
These are like blind spots we all face in life. So these are the fundamental conversations that I have, and including, am I diversified properly, and how does taxes impact my overall financial picture?
Yeah.
And, the last thing I'll share is the passion that I have for this business in the last 22 years coming from as an immigrant, like we all came from someplace else. I watched how my parents struggled, and my mom worked cleaning homes for 35 years. My dad worked in security. I just wanted to do better. But for me, more importantly, is I was never blessed with kids of my own. So I take that as my clients and their kids and their family, like Jen's, as if they're my own. So I spend day and night just thinking about what can we do about their financial futures. So that's where that passion comes, and I take it very seriously.
We love that. So, you talked about being the child of an immigrant, and all of us are children of immigrants, and a lot of our viewers are people of color that are all over the world, not just in the US. But one of the things that is true to our culture is that we don't like to talk about money. We don't like to think about future. And fortunately, we've had the privilege and the exposure to encounter somebody like you to help us figure things out. I remember when I just started working in corporate, because I was an entrepreneur for a long time. And when I started working in corporate, my payroll person called me into the office one day and said, I'm taking the maximum amount out of your salary. And I didn't even know what that meant. Right. I didn't even know what I meant. But when I left that company and I got back the money, I was like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And so what we really want to do is to talk about the things that people don't talk about. We are in our 40s. And I mean, at some point we started to play catch up. I started a little bit earlier in my 30s, where I started to learn about investments and insurance and different kinds of insurance, different ways of how to save and how to create wealth. And I remember when Jen just met with you for the first time, she called me and she was like, oh my gosh, a whole new world opened up to me. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to allow her to talk about her experience so that you guys can share.
Definitely. So kind of when I opened up, I was speaking about, I'm a single woman, I'm a mother, I'm a a subcontracted employee, right? So I was making a lot of money, but I didn't know how to help that, how to have that help me, right?
How to make it.
Yeah, how to make it
Yeah.
grow, how to save it, how to budget. The first thing that Kurt did for me was write down everything that you're spending. And let me tell you, it opened up a whole new world, because I really could start seeing where I was making mistakes, right? And so I think that kind of leads us into the conversation about what are some of the mistakes that you see that at this age, and we're talking about 40, but we're also talking about in general, what are some of the mistakes that you see that our age and that this generation is making in terms of saving, budgeting, investing, and
and for those that are younger, how not to make the mistakes and how to start earlier.
Correct.
That's great. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm not in my 40s, so. But
well,
no. All right, let's start lying. Say I'm 30, you guys are 20s. They'll believe us. So, Jen, thank you, by the way, for those kind words, Kathy. The thing that I always remember about when it comes to mistakes that are concerns that we all share, and it's really 4, but I'll spend more time on the top 3. You guys remember the financial crisis in 2008? Remember that we all experienced a very painful period, and as well as the pandemic over the last 3+ years.
Yeah.
One of the common concerns that we should address, as regardless of our age, is do we have enough liquidity?
Yeah.
And for those who are struggling, that's maybe not applicable. We can talk about strategies to get you out of that bucket. But if you have the means and the resources, what I find most lacking in Americans is not having enough savings. And the reason why I mentioned the pandemic and I mentioned the financial crisis is because what impacted most of us was when that occurred. Yeah. Most people, I believe the statistic says the average American has like $1,500 in their savings.
Wow.
Yep.
Yes. So whether it's an event that's out of your control or in your control, if it happens and life happens, these are the blind spots. And within 30 years to 60, most people are struggling. So my advice always is, and one of the concerns to address is always having enough liquidity. And conventional wisdom says, sometimes say 3 months of liquidity, that equals to basically whatever your monthly expenses are, have at least 3 times that amount. I'm more conservative. I speak to my clients about having at least 6 to 9 months of liquidity available. So that's where you first start. So that's one of the primary concerns that I find are mistakes that people are making. Number 2, and Jen can attest to this, is even when you seek the knowledge, a lot of times things are all scattered. So you have your 401k, maybe your 403b if you work for nonprofits. Kathy, you talked about that, right? You're just working and you head down and you're building and you're working and you're raising family, raising kids. And then you look up and you realize you have all this stuff, but it doesn't quite make sense, right? So a lot of times it's the lack of a financial plan. So my conversations with my clients when it comes to mistakes that they're making is about putting things in a plan. Let's plan. Like you plan vacations. You don't just walk to the airport with a suitcase and go, where am I going? People plan more for vacations than they do for their financial futures.
That is so true.
Right? Here's a big one for parents, and you guys can relate. A lot of parents, especially women, I find, and by the way, most of my clients are females, over 40.
I love that. I think it's time.
I did a statistic 10 years ago, and I was like, wow, 75% of my clients are women. It's crazy. Wow. So I find this mistake commonly amongst female women in particular, and that's putting their kids' college and their kids' future ahead of their own retirement. So you'll see when we sit down and talk about what's your primary concerns, someone in their 40s, late 40s or 50s are still, well, maybe not 50s, but you get my point. 30s and 40s, they're talking about, I want to make sure I send junior to college and make sure I have enough set aside for their future. And then I'm asking, what about yours? And it's like a blank stare. I have a 401k. So typically what happens is people are focusing more on putting the kids into a better place than they are. And that becomes more important to them. Not realizing that in America in particular, everyone goes to school. You really do. You know, this is a place that we will go to school. And the last one is when for someone who seeks the advice, and this is number 4, I find they seek the advice, but typically they may run into stockbrokers or bankers or product pushers. So they may not be diversified. They may not have conversations around, you know, long-term financial goals and all the different types of instruments. And the person may not be fully listening, but mostly selling. So sometimes you may do the right thing, but run into the wrong advisor. So
Yeah.
those typically are the four that I find.
You know, we think about, when you talk about generally people tell you to have 3 months of savings, and you encourage us to have 6 to 9 months. Guys, let me tell you something. I lived off of my savings for 2 years when COVID happened.
See?
Right? If I did not have proper financial planning going into COVID,
That's right.
I would be kicking rocks on the street going crazy.
Yeah, I know.
So even though Kirk says 6 to 9 months, it seems like a lot. But when you're preparing for future and making sure that you are ready financially for anything that comes along, 6 to 9 months is really a drop in the bucket.
It really is.
It really is.
Last week we spoke about how we're rechanging our careers, and that's another reason why we want to have that security, right? We want to make sure that should we decide we're going to follow our passion, or we want to become an entrepreneur, we want to go do this whole other thing, right? That we've got some of the comfort to be able to spread our wings a little bit without knowing that we're not going to just fall and burn.
Yeah, and think about the stress involved, Kat. You guys know this. Think about the stress involved when you think about starting a business or doing something else, but it's about capital. You don't have anything. You can't squeeze extra monies out because you can't afford to not pay your rent and your mortgage. It's way too much stress that they think, and it can be easily. I think that's the number one financial mistake most of us make. It's just not having enough savings. I've made it personally, so I can relate. Not having enough savings, and also not having a cash flow. We talked about an expense or a budget or a worksheet, knowing exactly what your expenses are and what's coming in and what's going out. Which
that's what I was going to just go back to. Genesis talked about having a budget, right? Understanding exactly where our money goes definitely has to be the first place to start, because a lot of the time we spend money and we think it's on simple things like, oh, I'm just going to go to lunch with my girlfriend. And you realize that you're going to lunch 5 times a week.
And it's $1,000 a month.
Correct.
Right? It's $1,000 a month. The first thing that you had me do was, well, the beautiful part of working with Kirk, guys, and I say the beautiful part because it wasn't just like, hey, Kirk, I have these financial questions, help me, right? There was a lot of education. There was so much education that came first, right? We had so many meetings about, hey, this is what budgeting even looks like. Hey, these are the things that you want to look at when you're doing a spreadsheet. Hey, these are some of the areas that you might want to think that you're not spending so much money there, but these are where you want to kind of like recalibrate some of your spending. So I thought that was the most integral part, because the financial literacy part is so difficult for so many people, especially being children of immigrants or first generation Americans. A lot of our parents either came from poverty, or this is the first generation where there's a little bit of money. And so the first thing that they tell you is put it in a savings account or put it in real estate, but there's nothing talking about investing. There's nothing talking about retirement accounts, all of these other things that are so crucial, right?
So once we budgeted and we have an understanding of where our money is coming from and how what the flow looks like, what's next?
Got it. So we're talking basically about some other concerns. I don't want to make this to be a dowdy, it's terrible. Life is fun. We know this. We can have a great time, but you also have to deal with some serious issues as well. So it's about managing through this.
Play responsibly.
Right. Fun and games plus it's serious life. So I just want to point out the things that we focus on and what some of the things that you should be aware of. And typically some areas of concerns. I find there's 3. There are 3 areas of concern. And number one, as you start to get into your 40s and you get older, and now I'm in my 50s, one of the number one concerns that we have that we never planned for really, especially, again, females, and especially if you're the oldest daughter in the family. Oh, look at this. I didn't even know that. I did not know that. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Everybody else.
Definitely.
There you go. It's called, I was about to quiz you.
Yep.
You're called the sandwich generation for a reason, right? Because you take care of your kids. And now guess what? Parents are now getting into their mid to late 70s, starting to get a little ill. Yeah. And there you go. And so it's not something you plan for. So taking care of elderly parents is another concern that just creeps up on you as you're now trying to get the kids through school and now planning your retirement. Here comes the parents' care. So that's something that we can always talk about in more depth, but that's one concern that we should start to prepare ourselves for. Yep. Number two, and this one is big, especially in our community. This is a huge one. In fact, more than likely, most people have not done any type of estate plans.
Oh.
Most people, right?
Listen,
most.
I had this conversation with my mother and my father. Almost every month, we're broaching a conversation again because people don't understand, if you don't have something in place, everything that could have been could just evaporate.
Probate.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo. It is one of the messiest things.
Evaporate in government taking away.
Oh God, it is awful. It is one of the most awful things to witness when you see your parents, when you see this situation, people battling over houses with I just had a call yesterday with a young lady from Brazil. She's dealing with, her dad had a outside half sister that she did not know.
Oh, geez.
The dad had like 15 properties in Brazil.
And we know that's typical for our
No, that's not true at all. Never happens in our community.
Never happened.
You know, my dad, as a side note, my dad was the only one that didn't have outside kids in all my family.
My grandfather, at my grandfather's funeral, my father met 19 brothers and sisters. He had 21 children. Yes, I'll leave that right there.
Just let that sit there for a bit.
Culture.
Yes.
And again, it was at the funeral, so you can imagine that while he was sick and in my house, nobody else called or visited or sent money. So
yeah.
It's
yes. So how do we fix this? Well, one, we can work on our parents to put a plan in place and put me in front of them. Just get me in front of them. That's one of the good places to start. But it's not an easy conversation. It really isn't. Oh. We know that. It's a challenge. Because most people also feel that I need to have a lot of wealth before I do a plan. And that's
always, I have no debt left to give you.
Yeah, exactly. I want to make sure I do. So once you have someone or something you care about, you should put a plan in place.
Yeah.
I think people are generally uncomfortable talking about death and what that could look like. So even broaching the conversation around that discomfort is really important, you know?
Yeah, that's why it's probably like, I think years ago, I think it was 90% of Americans do not have a will or a trust in place. It's really
Yep, I did my estate planning with my husband like 2 weeks ago, and it's still about 75% of people do, or 85% of people still don't have estate planning in place. Yep.
And then when they do sit with the attorney, then they quibble about the cost and expense. I get it. So, but Jen, you hit the nail. It's more of an emotional concern than practical, because we all know we're gonna die. That's it. So why not do it? All right. And here's one that's interesting, I find. You ask most people, how long do you expect to live? What's your mortality ages?
Like 70.
What's that? Excuse me, Kathy?
What? No, well, now that our parents are 70, you're like, oh, well, we can live until 90.
Right.
But when you're younger, you think, okay, 70 is old.
Right.
How did you, when you were a kid, how did you look at people in their 40s?
Oh my old. Kurt, we're not having that conversation, okay? That conversation is not happening.
I know.
My kids call me dinosaur, and I'm like, are you kidding me? But please continue.
I just realized that at this age, when my mom and dad came to this country, I'm older than when they came here, and that blew me away.
Wow.
I came here at the age of 16, and I already thought my mom and dad were in their 70s, but they were younger than me.
Yeah.
At this age,
like us, though. Our parents, you know, it's different. Yeah, it's different.
So that's a challenge. We're not planning to live as long as we think we will. So the number one concern of most Americans now, statistically, is running out of money.
Yep.
Because you realize with medicine and everything else, you're going to live longer than you think. So your money has to last.
But you talk about medicine. What about critical illness? You know, if somebody gets sick, what happens then?
Well, Kathy, I'm glad you asked. See, we can have fun with serious, depressing topics.
Right. We always do that. Yeah. Most of the things we talk about are not easy, but we just make them easier.
Necessary. I call that the blind spot, and that's what I was going to wrap up with. So we kind of moving pretty briskly. I like this. The additional blind spots we face in life, and Kathy, that's number one. Most of us are not prepared for when we get sick or hurt for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And that's what I talked about earlier, and I touched on earlier. So in my practice, and I find most people who even have advisors, they tend to have like an investment advisor, right? Somebody who's a stockbroker, somebody who makes, try to make you money in the quick run. That's not my business. So what I find I look at mostly is, again, besides all the concepts we talked about before, is this one in particular that really and truly is one of the things that's core to my nature and my business. And that's what happens if you got sick or hurt for an extended period of time. And for most of us, is you rely on a company that may or may not provide it. So Jen knows this. If you work for a company, I will always ask about your summary of benefits to see if you have long-term disability, if there's an option to get long-term care and these type of solutions. Because nothing, I think, again, I like these statistics. I believe 90% of us spend 100% of our assets in the last 2 years of our lives.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Because if you're sick for an extended period of time, Medicare insurance will not cover over a certain period. And at that point, it becomes your responsibility. And I've witnessed, when I worked in the banking world for 11 years, I witnessed accounts drained, millions of dollars drained to pay for grandma or your mom's care. Wow. And that is real. So that means that the next generation starts from scratch.
Right.
And it was so unnecessary when it could have been avoided. So Kathy, yes, that's a truly big concern.
When you think about long-term care, it's not just about things like cancer. I mean, my best friend's father got dementia. He had a stroke, which triggered dementia. And let me tell you something, he lived for almost 9 years in a home.
At what price?
Like a vegetable, curled up, but still fully functional internally. So you are paying for care for 9 years. That's a lot of money that somebody else is absorbing.
Because if you own a house, if you have assets, the first thing they'll ask is who's going to pay for it. And then typically there goes the savings, there goes your retirement accounts, and then it's time to sell the house. It's terrible.
Wow.
So we talk about, shifting assets out of parents' names and things like that. It's bigger. I work with people's attorneys in these concepts because it's not something to do. I work with the professionals to make sure that we're all on the same page. And that's some of the things that we really address. Because like I said, 100% of assets are depleted in the last 2 years in many cases.
Guys, before we continue, I think it's important for us to focus on what's important, right? One, there are so many people that come to us and they try to sell us insurance, or they try to sell us stocks, or they're trying to sell us crypto. But what Kirk is trying to explain to us, and what we have learned to be true, is that we actually need a financial advisor that helps us to take a holistic look at everything that we're doing, right? So how much money we have coming in, how the money is going out, where we're spending unnecessarily, where we can save and conserve, and what does that saving plan look like? If we're trying to retire at 70, or we're planning to be alive until we're 90 or 100, what does that look like? What do we need to put in place? So it's a holistic approach. It's okay, these are the types of coverage that you need to have. This is the type of investment, that portfolio that we want to create. Some are long-term, some are short-term. And so it is having somebody that we can trust, that has over 20 years of experience. I mean, I know there are people starting in the business, but you want somebody that knows what they're doing, right?
Definitely.
So that has the experience and understands holistically what we need to help us to not only grow wealth, but to manage, life from a financial perspective.
Definitely. Can I just interject here?
Sure.
I must have shopped. I met with 3 or 4 different people from different companies, and some of them were my very own bank, right? And they were pushing different products and, hey, you can do this. But I didn't feel like they really had my whole picture, right? Yeah. They didn't understand who Genesis as a person was.
Who cares if you have 2 children?
Right. Who cares if you have children? Who cares if you don't have anything set up? It's kind of like, you know what, give us your money. We're going to invest it for you. And so it felt very impersonal. And, I'm the most personal person. And I hate to say this, and I think that you can both, attest, is that I do need a little bit of, hand holding when it comes to making big decisions. Right. And so I really am so grateful to both of you, right? But to Kirk in this context, because you have been such an invaluable person in helping me not only to organize, my finances, but to really look at areas that I wasn't thinking about, as well as to start looking at ways to not only make money, to create wealth, right? Because there is a difference. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. A couple of things I want to add to that. Number one would be, it really aggravates me when I meet someone like Jen, because that's a common situation. It happens all the time. And that is someone who is seeking help, like says, you know what, I know I need help, but I don't know where to go, where to start. So they keep running into people who are steering you in the direction of a product. So that's one of the first tips. If you sit down with any advisor, and in that first meeting, if there's a product that's discussed, head for the door.
Right.
Yeah.
First rule. Number two, that, by the way, like I said, that really bothers me more than anything else. The other thing too is, how do you know you're with the right advisor? And I appreciate you guys, but I'm not the only one. There are some terrific advisors in our industry. Just how do you find them? And a lot of times it's not just by experience. That's a great place to start.
Yeah.
But you'll notice if that person is listening and not talking. So that first meeting, you should be doing a lot of the talking, and they should be doing a lot of questions and answers, just questions and questions, and getting like a full, and the question should not be only geared towards your insurance, right? It's like, or your investments, you know, your money that you have sitting that you're looking to invest. If it's all about, well, what are your goals for those funds? And, you know, what are you planning to do with those money? That money. What about the rest of my life? What about my parents? What about, do you have anyone else you need to take care of? What about your kids' college? What about, do you have any kind of disability or insurance at work if these things that we talked about before happens? Do your parents have long-term care? Do you have a trust and a plan and estate in place? If those conversations are not occurring in the first place, again, just excuse yourself and just steal. Those are my 2 tips. And I truly believe in it.
So guys, I want you to understand this. Kirk is not my advisor, right? So I went through trial and error from, fortunately, I figured out a lot of it when I moved to Jamaica and I started corporate life. But when Genesis came to me and was singing Kirk's praises, I was like, I need to meet this Kirk, right? Because like Jen, I wanted one place that I could go to for somebody to help me and guide me through the process. But I went through trial and error, and that's how I ended up where I was, right? I had the benefits, and I truly believe that finding a financial advisor is like finding a therapist. Absolutely. It has to be the person that's the right fit for you, right? But understanding what Kirk is saying is that one of the ways to find the right person is to make sure that the person is a good listener and to make sure that they are asking the right questions. How do we know what the right questions are? And we're going to share some of the resources on our website at focus.org. But the reason that we decided that we needed to have this conversation today, because trust me, he's not paying us and we're not paying him. It was purely from the excitement and the information that I got from Genesis's initial engagement with him. And it has continued for almost a year and something, right? And it's until I understood the scope of what he actually did. And I was like, where were you when I needed you?
He's right here, guys.
And so we said this is a resource that we had to share with our community because it is so necessary, especially if you are in your 20s. We get ahead of the game. But if you're at our stage in your 40s or older,
still play catch up. Yes,
absolutely. And it's not as hard to play catch up as you might think.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's true.
But I have another question for you.
Sure.
In addition to being a financial advisor, who else do you think would be a good to wrap yourself up with other professionals that can help you? So it would be somebody like a financial advisor. Who else? Like accountants? Like who else would you say would be a really important person to have that helps you to determine, you know, how your finances should go and managing it?
Wow, that's a great question. I try to think outside the box. Besides having an attorney, right, and an accountant, a good accountant.
A good accountant. We need to stress that.
Yes, because they're tax preparers. Again, they're tax preparers, and then you have CPAs, right? Jen and I, we've had conversations along these lines. Sometimes if you have a business, just going to any accountant is not going to solve it. Sometimes you need a CPA who specializes in business. So these are questions to ask. You know, you always ask questions that's related to your needs, not just, oh, they say they're an accountant, I'm going to use them. I'm a big believer in utilizing sources that are not just the accountants and the attorneys, like I said, like a life coach, for instance. You know, you see, a life coach invariably knows the bigger picture than just one aspect of your life. They're looking at your overall broad life picture, right? I mean, Kathy, you know what I'm talking about. So having someone like that as a resource in your life is terrific. You know what else too I would recommend, especially for younger people? Getting a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you work again.
It's amazing. This
You guys will be great mentors. I mean, terrific mentors, especially for young ladies.
Thank you.
So just having someone who's been through the wars and who's successful at doing certain things and say, you know what, let me attach myself. And instead of just trying to do it on my own, let me just see a person. And a mentor doesn't require you to spend every day with that person, but just once a month or so, you can just spend an hour and just ask a lot of questions. So yes, so to answer your question, I would always look to those type of people in my life, have them in my life.
Awesome.
That's brilliant.
I'm going to, so you guys know that I'm a mental health counselor. And since I started working with Kurt, I've kind of carved out a slight niche because it's so funny. You know, if you build it, they will come. I've always said that, and it's so true. More and more lately, the clients that I've been seeing for depression and anxiety are coming in because of financial issues. You know, they're coming in because right now there's inflation, you know, or they've been laid off from jobs. There's not enough money, you know, so it's incredible that I've actually been doing a lot of coping skills and resource, you know, things like that for people who are having these financial issues. What's one thing, kind of as before we finish, what's one thing that you can tell people now during this time of inflation and things, people who are scared, what's one thing that you think that you can say to kind of quell some fear and to help folks find some hope in this really kind of time?
And yes, that's real. Number one, I don't try to minimize the crisis that people are experiencing because it's real, but I always believe in this too shall pass mentality. So I try to create a positive look and not to get bogged down by where you are currently, because we've all been through some tough times and look at where we are now. And then we may also run into another tough times as well. So I always talk from that standpoint as to this is now and where we are going forward may be different. So how do you plan for it? So that's number one. So give people positive feedback is good. But also you have to be practical. And sometimes you cannot just give advice willy-nilly without knowing their spending. We talked about that. That's why I say it is so critical to anything that we do. How do we build our savings and how do we work on our cash flow expenses? You see, budget is a tough word. It sometimes sounds negative, but I like to call it a cash flow analysis. It's really tough. But that exercise, Jen can attest to a change. It's a game changer, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So knowing your spending, and I got to tell you a quick little tip that works too, even in a high inflationary environment. Cut down on your credit card usage and just use your debit card for spending. Let me tell you, just something as simple as that. So if you know your cash flow, what's coming in, what's going out, you start to cut some of the extra and the waste. Like some people are paying for, you know, like subscriptions that they're not using. Some people are using gym memberships they're never going to. It's time for you to look at maybe getting like a cheaper gym. You know, they're going out the cocktails.
Or no, Jane, you can exercise outside. You don't have
outside. All you need is a floor, guys. You don't need a gym. All you need is a floor. You can get yourself in shape.
Your body
walk 30 minutes a day.
Thank you. So there are so many things in your life that you can control. You cannot control inflation, but you can control your own inflation. So cut down on your spending, on some wasteful spending. Start budgeting, using a debit card instead of the credit cards. Cut up some credit cards if you need to. Consolidate if you need to. There's so many different, it's just making it a focus. And that in itself will build those habits. And the focus has got to be maniacal when it comes to building up your savings.
That's so true.
Yeah,
so
that's the key. But building up your savings, cutting down your debts, paying off credit cards one by one, the highest interest credit cards first, and then work towards the lowest. Those things have to be maniacal. Like you have to become so laser focused. Cut out if you have to, this carnival is happening right now. And our people love a carnival. They'll, I know. But maybe 1 year you might have to skip it. You might have to skip the carnival, maybe 1 year. It's an expense. So it's how serious you are.
So I think the most important takeaway is understanding that life happens and we can get overwhelmed, but seeking the right guidance and the right help and understanding that it is taking a holistic look at what is the situation and creating a plan to execute how to manage it, right? So yes, COVID happened to all of us. Yes, we are going through an economic downturn at this point, but it's something that, like Kirk says, this too shall pass. We've experienced it. It's a cycle. How
Mhm.
do we equip ourselves to ride it out? How do we prepare ourselves to for the next one that's going to come, to make sure that when we're riding it out, it's a little less stressful.
There you go.
No matter
That's
how much
it.
money you have in the bank, it's always going to be stressful if you know that what you're bringing in is less than what you're putting out
Spending,
at some
right,
point, right?
exactly. Mhm.
And so, managing our spending, managing our expenses, and but most importantly, being aware of it.
Yeah.
Now I have gotten into the habit because my husband he manages money better than I do.
Right.
From the perspective of, he's great with numbers, and he can tell you how much money we spent. So now every month I write down. If I go to the supermarket, I know now that I spent more money last month than I did the month before. Why? Because I had more host guests this time, or whatever the case is. And so now it's being aware of it so that I can manage it.
Yeah, knowing your patterns, knowing your spending patterns, right? I know when I was doing my budgeting, I realized I am spending too much money on Amazon. I am spending too much money going out to dinner. I am spending, and you know what? It was a very humbling, because part of our identity is on that, right? So much of our identity is on what I can do. And this is the money I make. So of course I want to spend it, and I want to, and doing the budgeting made me realize, like, nobody's going to come rescue me if I go broke.
And it's not just dinner, and it's not just lunch, because those just lunches add up, and those just dinners add up.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, they do. So, I mean, there was one thing I was going to say as you guys are speaking, and this is important too. You're not going to try to accomplish all of these in one shot. Like Jen and I understand that it's a relationship, so it may take years, but it's just gradual. We do it in stages.
Yeah.
So part of this is not one and done. You sit down and you do all of this together. It's overwhelming. So you pick the most critical areas, you address those, and then 6 months or so, a year from now, we go back and we address the next critical issue. So over time, when you're done, I would say within 2 to 3 years, you should have all of these things accomplished under the right circumstance.
Yeah, and guys, we talk about it all the time. Accountability matters. So who are you being accountable to when it comes to your finances?
Yeah.
It does a person know what they're doing, and obviously we hope that they have your best interests at heart. So one thing that's for sure, we know now that financial advisors are actually available. And we'll have Kirk's information as well for you to be able to reach out to him, or other recommendations, because I mean, he'll tell you, if I'm not the right fit, maybe this person will be the right fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. It is intuitive, right? And I think definitely, Kirk, when we're finished here today, please give us all of your information so that we can send you clients, and we can send you, because he has been a hell of a resource for me. He's turned into a friend of mine, somebody who I really believe cares about me and my finances. And he's been a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for being our guest today.
It really is. I live for this, guy. I love this. And thank you for the opportunity.
We're really excited. If we do live events, we'd like for you to be a part of that.
I like live. This is not comfortable for me, by the way.
Yes, it's a conversation that needs to keep having. It's a conversation that we want to build on. So thank you, Kurt. Welcome. And
thank you, guys, and we will see you again next week. If you have questions, concerns, don't forget to write us. We can put you in touch with Kirk, but we'll have his information on our website so that you guys can contact him directly. Thanks, guys. Have a great
Bye-bye.